21%, that should be enough. Okay, so we'll touch base on chapter 9 today, which is social development, and then like the physical environment, structuring it, putting it together to kind of help with that social development. The assignment for this chapter in this week is called space organization. Okay, so on this video here, so this kind of shows in a classroom, so kind of take a look at that as you watch this video. Looking at things like it says here, things that are less traditional about the organization of the space. That's annoying. Because it's not as, I mean, if you think of a traditional like elementary, early childhood classroom, you kind of, I think, do you have a picture of what you think a traditional, like, I don't know. So traditional can also be a tricky word, right? If you're talking about traditionally in your culture or traditionally in like a school type setting, but that's kind of the thought I'm going at for, I guess, is the traditional school type setting where it's desks in a row and, you know, some of those things. But of course, that would be different for early childhood, like preschool Head Start stuff where there's probably not desks, but maybe tables and a lot of stuff on the floor, but smaller chairs and stuff. But anyway, as you watch this, looking at it and seeing what's different about it as compared to what maybe we are typically used to seeing, they use some flexible grouping, how they establish, put together different types of learning communities, and then also do some differentiated learning or groupings, and then some self-regulated learning. So have we talked about, I don't think we have it here, or any of your other classes talked about like differentiation or differentiated learning? Okay, so in terms of like here it talks about differentiated groups, or thinking of like differentiated learning where you're taking students and putting them in it'd be like a variety of groupings, right? Not just the same group every day for, you know, a month and then switching. It might be this group is together during like reading time or language arts. You know, for example, this group might be together, a different group will be together during you know, social skills development or something like that. So when you differentiate your groups, one, you're putting students in different groups, maybe at different times during the day or week. Another way you can differentiate groups is to take them and maybe you have somebody that really, or a student that excels at whatever you're doing, right, or advanced. You have some that are in the middle or on grade level average. You have some that are below so that they can help each other out. Sometimes people will do like ability grouping, right, where you put the students of the same ability together and then they work. And maybe you have advanced students and they're working on like a more detailed, advanced, difficult topic activity. You have students that are struggling with that. You're working on some stuff that is maybe remedial, whatever that might be. So there's different ways that you can go about doing that and differentiating it. All of them are fine as long as you don't do it the same way every single time all year long. You know what I mean? So expose the students to a variety of student abilities and also, you know, topics too. So that's kind of what they're talking about, the differentiated groups. What does that look like? Can you tell how the teacher is switching them up or changing them? Okay, so and then of course same thing, obviously the first half of the semester is over, right? So any of these assignments that you're working on, if they're not in, you got until the end of the semester. to complete them. So. Okay, any other questions you can think of on that assignment? Okay, so so the physical environment, a lot of times, of course, that depends upon where we're at, right? Or what organization we're teaching in, preschool, the daycare, a Head Start, or a kindergarten classroom, or a school, you know, primary school setting. But things that we want to look at and think about in regards to setting up the environment for our classroom. It's not just an academic component, right? But it's something like appropriate behavior. Okay, how you set it up can have a big effect on student behavior. They're either challenging behavior, appropriate behavior. We may not think about that right away, but sometimes it's trial and error a little bit in regards to like where we place things at. So we want to think about that a little bit. So thinking of in early childhood, one thing we think of is like centers, right? And activities. Placing a loud center by a quiet center can be cause for like some behavior challenges, right? If you have someone that's like either trying to read or trying to do an activity where maybe they're painting and you have kids right next to them, they're building blocks loud, knocking things over, things get knocked over into the painting, and that paint gets spilled or water, or you know, that can create some issues. So thinking about those components, trying to involve the children as much as possible into, like it says, personalizing them. So again, if we go back to things we talk about in a lot of classes is student interest and what they're interested in. If you can bring that into more of bring it into the classroom, they'll be a little bit more engaged. So if you could personalize some spaces that they're going to be involved with, or that where they'll be spending time at, that's going to help them to be more engaged as well. Talks about adjusting the setting to resolve problems. So if you realize that what you have set up is not working for some students, then you just switch it, right? So things like where you have, if you have students hand in papers, for example, where you hand them in at. Maybe you have a group of students sitting by the spot where kids are handing in papers, and every time kids go to hand in a paper, these group of students gets off task because they're distracted by those students. Well, then you either switch that group somewhere else, or you move where you have those papers, you know, handed in. So just simple things like that. Number one, that we can't always like anticipate those types of things happening or some of those problems happening, but we can sure adjust it if we do see those. So. And then acting deliberately to achieve social competence. So like social skills, understanding certain things like socially, like, how you ask for help, where you go to sharpen your pencil, where you go to, get a drink of water. What if there's two people in line to get a drink of water, and all of a sudden there's three, then there's four, then there's five. Well, that's an opportunity to say, hey, if you allow students to go and get a drink of water on their own, but if you know that there's one student getting a drink of water, then you don't get up until that person's done. So you're acting deliberately in regards to like teaching that opportunity, that lesson to understand some of those. So the physical environment has a lot to do with, of course, our students' learning and their behavior. So health and safety, of course, is very important, right? In that. So looking at the interior space and what that looks like, right? I don't think there's many classrooms anymore in regards to like table stuff, but old school tables have the very like sharp corners, right? And these are of course plastic, and some have like covers on them and stuff. But if you had these tables in probably not the best, obviously, right? Because they're too high, so kids, if they had sharp corners, could easily run into them and stuff. So you have to adjust and change some of those things for the kids. So, so the interior and exterior components, we have to just kind of take a look at in terms of potential like dangers. And we don't always, probably more than 95% of the time, we don't have a say in what like types of furniture are in our classroom, or even like playground equipment, things outside, that's all kind of pre-established already. But we can definitely check and see and make sure things are, appropriate. If we're looking at like a kindergarten, first grade setting, we think about a recess component, for example. That playground is probably built for third grade-ish average, right? So kindergarten kids, we have to be careful that if there's something that doesn't really fit them, too tall, too dangerous, we have to try to keep them, away from that as much as possible. There need to be things like, kids have like on top of a slide, for example, not real high, but put their hands up there. There's plastic pieces that maybe that didn't, they're sticking up a little bit for whatever. So there's just random things that can happen, but definitely have to pay attention to our interior and exterior and adjust them when needed. So we can exchange tables out sometimes. We can add bean bags. We can add rugs. We can try to get smaller chairs. We can, there's a lot of things we can try to do. So how we arrange the furniture or the furnishings in our classroom kind of make a difference. I did touch on this a little bit, but so we have centers, right? And so we're going to have individual centers, or quiet centers a little bit more. What's your experience or opinion in regards to types of centers that you've seen at like Head Start components? Or maybe I'm way off in terms of types of centers stuff, but you have a combination of those that you've seen, or is it? That's pretty standard. One's common, right? With dramatic play and the blocks and components and stuff. So I think maybe it kind of depends on the organization, or sometimes even the age, right, of the kids. And so like in some kindergarten, first grade classrooms, we've seen some more like a reading center, right? And maybe it's not even so much reading, but a place to get books, maybe look at books if they're not up to that reading component yet. Because getting in that kindergarten age, you got some kids that are going to be able to read, fairly well, some not at all. And so getting a variety of books there for them to have some kind of quiet time, and also what that looks like. I've seen high school language arts classrooms have a couch in them, or a beanbag where kids can sit and read comfortably, right? Which kind of makes sense to me, because sitting at a desk trying to read a book that is supposed to be relaxing doesn't always really make much sense. But so there can be some of those individual components, but then also building some of those for the small group and the large group components as well. Not as many large group ones. That's more where you get like the circle time stuff, with Head Start, for example. But so pathways is something to also think about, right? So where kids are going to walk to. It's kind of one where I talked about like handing in papers. Where's that at? What's the pathway to get to the sink, the bathroom, hand in papers, the teacher's desk, places that might be a high traffic area. We definitely want to keep desks and tables and those types of things out of. So boundaries are good for young kids too. So when we talk about the centers, what are some boundaries we can put in place? Doesn't always have to be a physical boundary, but if they know maybe there's a carpet or a rug, if you don't have a rug or a carpet, maybe you just have strips of old carpet or something that you kind of can put down as like a boundary, almost to say, we want to keep the blocks within this area here. Don't let them spill out. If they spill out, pick them up, bring them back over on that side, just so that they understand that that's that boundary, that space for that specific activity or center. Here it talks about the concrete ones are best in early childhood, so that they can see them till they are able to develop a little bit more. And storage sometimes is an issue of space to store everything. And so most classrooms are not built big enough or not large enough to have all the centers you would probably want as a teacher. So number one, how do you rotate some different centers in throughout the year? And number two, where do you store that stuff when you're not using it? As you can see, like in here, storage is not real great, right? Stuff's just shoved everywhere in all the classrooms. And so, yeah, that might be a little different component. Some people I know will like store stuff at their house, you know, just because there's no place in their classroom to, or there's not a large enough storage place in the school or in the Head Start Center where that's at. But if you do something like that in terms of storing it at home, you definitely want to make sure you have approval from your supervisor or administrator or whatever, so people aren't like, oh, they're taking stuff home and stealing it or whatever. So anyway, so besides storing the stuff that you're not using, helping students to understand to put those things away, right? When they're done with them, storage, return them, obviously promotes responsibility as well. One of the big pieces, like down at the nest in the Montessori piece that they use, is that responsibility of returning stuff where it was at. If you're playing with something, put that back first, then you come back and you can get something else, you know, if you want to. But that's a big piece of the Montessori type curriculum, is that responsibility for the material. And accessible is important too, right? If students, if it's not at eye level or within their grasp and they have to ask you every time or somebody else every time to get it down, then it's not accessible for them and they probably use it less than we want them to. So. Skip that one. So, okay. So when we want to choose materials for our centers in regards to some things that we can use or that are important to use, what are the outcomes for that center? Or what are the outcomes of the materials we want to use them? So like, put you on the spot here, but a block center, what is the outcome of a block center for, or what would we want kids to develop, learn in a block center? And motor, gross motor could be, you know, some of the stacking stuff, lifting, you know, just a variety of those things. So we know, I mean, that's a pretty universal one, right? So as we get more specific with other things like a library or a kitchen or, you know, whatever it might be, science center, what are those outcomes for the materials that we put in there? And in the science center, it's going to be, it might be different for the different types of materials, you know, that we use. So we want to make sure it's developmentally appropriate. You've probably heard me say that a few times before on things, right? So, you know, what is it that we're doing with it? They're safe materials. So of course, with young children, choking hazard stuff, right? I know I've observed some of our student teachers do lesson stuff before. Introducing manipulatives, like I think they were doing money. And so they introduced some like coins and stuff. And the kids were like, yeah, I mean, they were excited. And then all of a sudden they were playing with them and bouncing them all over. And they weren't real coins, but falling off the table. Oh, and so structurally they're safe, but they should have introduced them like before she wanted to do the lesson. So they weren't totally brand new and they were like, yeah, because then after the lesson was just tagged and she's like, oh, so bad. I'm like, it's the way it goes sometimes, right? You don't know some of that stuff until after you do that. So it's got to be safe, and then also that they have some exposure to it before you want to maybe do a lesson. But if they're in a center, then that gives them the opportunity to explore that a little bit, and then we can kind of help them along with what we want them to learn. So talked about storage, attractive display of materials, right? So that kids see them. So sometimes when we're talking about a brand new center or brand new material, we may want to go through some of that stuff with them first, because one, if they don't know what it is, we want to kind of teach them a little bit about it, right? What it's used for, or what it represents, for example. So if you have materials, things in a science center or even a kitchen, or maybe a child hasn't been that exposed to a kitchen before, or the materials in there and stuff, we want to maybe help them through that just a little bit. sufficient quality and quantity. If we don't have enough for a large, if we're doing small groups, for example, if we don't have enough for groups of 3 or 4, then we might want to pull it back, or we might want to say, well, just 2 can be in here, at a time, rather than 4, because that could potentially lead to not sharing. Sharing could lead to some behavior issues. So, of course, appropriate in size, and then enough of them for the group size, if possible. So anytime you don't have enough of something, or even going back to furniture or whatever it is, it doesn't hurt to ask your supervisor, administrator. Maybe they have funds, maybe they don't, but the only way you know is if you ask them for that. Because the worst I can say is no, right? So. Okay, so a couple questions here, examples of some instances that are probably going to be pretty common, right? So what is the consequence when there's only one truck in the play area for a group of 3-year-olds? What do you think is going to happen? More than likely, right? Probably going to fight over it, okay? It takes some pretty mature 3-year-olds to take turns with that and play together when one of them is using that. So another one, for example, here, kindergarten classroom has a jumble of blocks in a cardboard box that is approximately 2.5 feet by 2 feet. Any ideas of some of the issues that might happen there? Could be not enough, right? 2.5 feet. I mean, that's like maybe that by that, right? So not enough. How well do you think that cardboard box will hold up? Yeah. So if you got a jumble of blocks and they're just kind of shoved in there, right? Kids are going to rip them out probably when they put them back. That cardboard box won't last too terribly long. So. And then last one, first grade teacher brings about 10 balls of various sizes outside for children to use. Probably in a race for them, there's different ones, right? So like there's probably 1 or 2 like really cool ones that are either bigger or smaller or whatever it might be. And then that might be an issue of like, well, come they get that one and I get this one that's flat or whatever. So, I mean, good idea in theory in terms of I got 10 and there's all these, enough for everybody, but then there might be some issues with that. So something you could do with that, if you're going to do those 10 every time at recess, then maybe you rotate. If there's 2 or 3 like cool ones that all the kids want, then you rotate them through every other day or something so that everybody gets a chance throughout the week or 2 weeks or however long it takes. So there are some ways around some of those behavior issues, but you kind of have to think of some of those, ahead of time a little bit. So of course we can change that environment anytime we want in the teacher in regards to our setup of our play areas and stuff. Adding and removing stuff makes a huge difference, right? We might add stuff to a center or an environment when it helps students to, maybe they've reached a certain level of like understanding. We want that to go a little bit deeper so we can add some more materials to it. Or maybe it's too difficult, we can remove some materials. So, and that can be for the cognitive, or it can be for like gross motor skills, social skills, whatever it might be. We might need to change things, of course, because of safety, all right, as well. So, and then looking at the needs of the kids, maybe there's a need for more space, right, or maybe less space depending upon kids' interests, or sometimes it can be too big and kids don't know what to do in that large space. So sometimes if we shrink it down a little bit, it helps them to focus or kind of understand a little bit more what they need to do. Closing centers sometimes, and so that's something that I think we'll talk about also in here, is that if you rotate centers, closing that or wrapping that up, what that looks like, giving kids notice that you're going to shift, or change center. Because if you have kids that really enjoy that center and that's their favorite thing to do, and they like to do it quite often, taking that away or changing it for some of them might be like difficult or hard, right? Because for young kids, sometimes change is hard. They don't understand it. So that would be something where you would want to let them know like ahead of time, oh, and next week we're going to switch this, center out. I'm going to add a new one, and just kind of remind them of that so that they're ready for that when that happens. So we want to make sure we evaluate it also, right, as a teacher. And so how are things going in there? Is the social behavior or the social skills appropriate? Are they, learning like the things we want to in regards to like having conversations about, the center? So that would be like, the vocabulary is developing, right? Because in a center or in a setting, we definitely want them to develop certain types of vocabulary. Right? If you're talking about science center as compared to a different type of play center, like the kitchen or even being outside, vocabulary is a big piece of that development. What is our role as an adult, like in terms of like direction and involvement? We want to be involved some, right, and check with the students, see how they're doing, ask them some questions, maybe kind of direct them a certain way. But we don't want to be there too much. If we have to constantly be there to like minimize behaviors or direct them towards the things that they're supposed to be doing, then we probably have to adjust that somehow to get it back to where we want it to be. So it talks about individual responsibility and the self-identity of children. So are the kids responsible enough to, are they being responsible enough to put the materials away, treat the materials appropriately, engage with each other in conversation and activities? And so if they're not, then, how do we adjust that? What do we have to do to intervene? Maybe part of it is it's just too much. We got to take it away. They're not ready for it, or maybe we have to add some material, take some material off. So just like when we evaluate the students on things that they're doing, we have to evaluate our classroom environment as well to make sure that things are going okay for them. Kids can be overstimulated sometimes. I don't know if I've talked about it in this class, but I've seen some classrooms where there's just a ton of material all over the wall. Classroom lights are dim, there's lamps on, there's all kinds of stuff happening. And I've seen in that particular classroom, there was way more behavior issues than there were in other classrooms, and partially because of all the stuff that was going on. It was just a little bit too much. So we have to be careful we don't overstimulate them. Everything on there was good, like on the walls and stuff was good material and information, but just maybe too much at once. So you can have some of that stuff up there, then take it down, put some new stuff up, rotate through. Time is important, right? And so organizing that effectively and efficiently is an important piece of the early childhood schedule, as you probably know from like Head Start stuff. Transition time can be tough for young kids. Do you have any horror stories of transition times?
I did last year. The online like when you come in, I would look for a small area, summer for the summer. And then we wash our hands when they come in, and he would play in a small like table for or whatever. And then I have to tell him everything, we're gonna eat breakfast, and then we're gonna do circle time and our activity. Then we can like I have to like step over that.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't have to sit there on the spectrum or anything. But okay, and then when it comes to circle time, he hated cleanup time, and then he shot us over to start crying.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was trying to comforting him,
yep.
To clean up, and I'm a big boy, and all my friends are cleaning up, so time to meet you too. Yeah, like
a tough one.
And they keep getting away from
yeah, sure. And that's a good, I mean, the peer or the friend, understanding the situation and kind of helping, through that, because that might be something that hopefully that child just kind of outgrows, matures a little bit, and stuff. But
if you really like fruit or.
Yep.
fruit or you do that.
Sure. That could be, you know, with some kids, you know, I've seen or saw it at like in the elementary school when recess is right after lunch, you know, most schools, right? So and when you're done, you can, you know, go. I mean, some kids would like maybe take 2 or 3 bites and then go and dump their plate, or some schools, you know, you have to ask your teacher if you can be done, you know, and stuff, but some I guess not or whatever. But would see that where, I mean, would rush through and dump their plate, and then there'd be, you know, a large group of them ready for recess. And sometimes it could go but so some of it could be that, like I said, or just they just wanted to play, and so they just don't eat very much. Right. That's a tough, you know, mealtime is a tough component, I think, because number one, personally, I hate to force kids to eat things if they don't like them, you know, or something, but you definitely don't want them to like hardly have anything at all to eat and, you know, type stuff. So it's hard. It's hard to do that. I have a hard time, you know, watching you eat that or try that, you know, or else, you know, and then the kid sits there and anyway, but yeah, but that kind of, you know, I mean, has to do a little bit with time, you know, also at the lunch piece of it, but anyway. But yeah, transitions can be tough, and I mean, it sounds like, you know, doing all the right things in regards to letting them know ahead of time, and, you know, this is what's going to happen. But even sometimes all those things that you have in place for some kids still does not work very good.
I know there's speech from the public school.
Mm-hmm.
And the human
yeah. Yep. Yeah. Some teachers or people are more comfortable doing things like that than not, and I mean, that's kind of yeah, that you weren't the only one. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's nice when you get that feeling that it doesn't just do it for me or to me. So the blocks of time and the scheduling is kind of nice too, when you can do that. So like Head Start, I think you have a nice advantage that way. We can structure your schedule a little bit more to your liking, because you have them in a building or for that chunk of time, compared to like a kindergarten through 3rd grade setting where things are structured a little differently, because there's a specific lunch time that you start with, right? And then maybe they might go and see like a PE teacher or, you know, some other stuff, and those times are chunked in by administration whenever it kind of works. So then you have to kind of work around those groups of time. So sometimes they might like go to lunch, like come back for 20 minutes, then they go back to something, music or PE or something else, you know. So what do you do for 20 minutes right after lunch, you know, when they're all wound up? And so putting those times or organizing that time can be a little bit more difficult in that K2 setting than a preschool, when you have them most of the time all day long. So predictability, kind of talked about, is good for most kids. And so knowing that routine, and when there's a change in it, letting them know ahead of time that things are going to be different, which is part of the reason why, like in Head Start, we do like calendar and schedule and all that stuff, right? Most places like beginning of the day, so that they know a little bit of what's coming up. But once they know that routine, it's quite a bit easier. So here's one thing, keeping in mind fatigue, the rate of the program, and the intensity of the schedule. So thinking about child's fatigue in something is, I think, kind of important, right? Like end of the day stuff is tough for young kids. And so if I had a kindergarten or 1st grade class, I probably would not put like a math or a reading at the end of the day, right? Because more than likely they're not doing naps anymore, so they're probably getting kindergarten. They might still some places, but they might be getting a little bit tired, right? So focus and attention is not as good. So those types of things, those more like rigorous or difficult subjects or information maybe do more towards the beginning of the day, but you can have kids that are fatigued in the morning as well because of maybe they didn't sleep good or things are happening at home or they were on a long trip or who knows what. So excuse me. My personal opinion and belief is if you have a child that is very tired in the morning or fatigued in the morning, if they fall asleep in your class, maybe there's a good reason they need a 20 minutes nap. If they have a short little nap, maybe they're awake and then can concentrate the rest of the day. Whereas if we continuously bug them to wake up, pay attention, blah, 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 maybe their whole day is shot, to a point. So that's kind of, I think, an opinion or personal preference, on some of those things. But we have to keep in mind, how kids feel during certain parts of the day, what their fatigue is like, their concentration level is like, and stuff as well. So that's why I'm talking about like after lunch or even recess and some of those times where they're coming back from an activity where they've been like really running and active or doing something different. We got to give them a little time to kind of calm down, refocus, do some of that, do an activity or do something where it's not too intense or creates a whole lot of focus is needed, but something where they can kind of relax a little bit. Maybe it's read a book, maybe it's do some writing, or maybe it's just even watching a short little video of something. So for transitions, okay, a couple things to think about, but plan them ahead and what are the expectations for them. So things like going from one classroom to another, or going from like, if you go to a different place for lunch, or how you line up, or any of those things, right? Share your expectations, your rules, all those things with them and practice them over and over and over and over until they get it. I've seen some teachers go back and redo things with students during the middle of the year. Sometimes, like when they go to wash their hands to the bathroom, sometimes kids get rambunctious or whatever, right? And they're not forget how to do things, but just kind of whatever push. And so I've seen teachers, we're going to walk down the hallway, so you're not running into people, and just all kinds of stuff. So if you need to do them again, then do them, but do it over and over until they understand it. Avoid rushing, right? Try to give yourself enough time so that students can make that transition fairly easy. So a common place probably would be before school starts or when kids arrive, and then as kids are getting ready to go, in regards to trying or allowing enough time for that to happen. I think back to like kids getting ready to go home, young kids, when it's cold outside and they're trying to put jackets on and hats and gloves and everything. That's a lot of work, and kids are missing stuff, and there's always something that is going on. But if they're waiting for a bus or the bus is waiting for them, that's tough to like, hurry up, we gotta go, and stuff. So trying to cut down on wait time as much as possible, right? That's easier said than done. Advance warning, you talked about that in regards, so we're going to clean up, time. But even things like as a whole group, flashing the lights or doing something about 5 minutes, and we're going to clean up, or in 5 minutes. So advance warning is definitely good and nice for kids in terms to know what is happening. So asking a kid or a child what they're going to do next after this activity, clean up, transition gradually. I talked about that. Involving unengaged children, if they're not doing something, they're kind of just sitting out to the side, getting them involved. Active supervision during transitions, meaning like you're definitely walking around, being engaged, maybe helping a little bit, put things away, giving focus, asking, not asking questions, but giving guidance in terms of what needs to be done, and kind of just helping them along that process. So transitions are definitely tough for young children. As they get older, it gets a little bit easier, but definitely something that they need lots of time and practice with. So now if you have kids with special needs, maybe they're on an IEP, behavior IEP, or maybe they just struggle a little bit, like the one kid that you talked about. you might have to give them some specific directions, more time. You might have to do, you know, a variety of things with them. But here it talks about a classroom or outdoor play area that you have seen, and consider how the environment could be adapted for a child who is one of these three. So if you think of like an outdoor, like something for recess, if we have somebody that is either like visually impaired, or is like very like hyper or hyperactive, you think of some changes or modifications for things that might be put into place for any of those? It's kind of a hard question. I don't really know the answer to that either. It's kind of tough, but I just think, so I think about like somebody that is visually impaired doesn't necessarily mean blind, but maybe they have a hard time seeing, right? How could, I mean, how would we modify, or how could you modify like a playground so that it's easier, there's easier access for them to stuff?
I don't know why I'm building that I put out. They didn't really have anything for this.
Yeah.
Visually impaired, it was all kind of.
Yep.
I mean, you could give yourself a view on the flat surface, but.
I think about like, you know, most playgrounds now have either those wood chips or those like rubber stuff. I mean, which is nice, but that's not a solid surface, right? So, I mean, walking might be a little more difficult for some of those kids who are visually impaired, or if you had somebody in a wheelchair, obviously they could not, you know, go on there. I mean, I understand it's for softness, right? For kids, if they fall down, they're not going to hurt themselves as much, but I know I think it's in Bismarck where they have a playground that's got like you can connect a wheelchair into like some swings, and there's just some different adaptive stuff for kids with either physical special needs or you know, cognitively challenged and stuff. There's some things that can be done, obviously, to adapt the playground for those kids. Something probably that most organizations or schools would be like reactive to, in regards to like, oh, we have a child that we need to modify some of this for or change it for, rather than think about it, you know, ahead of time. Okay, let's see. So social skills, social development in regards to the classroom. So arranging the classroom with social needs in mind. Okay, so a lot of times, like, we wouldn't maybe necessarily do that, but if we have kids that need to work on social skills, right, we probably would not be putting, if we had desks, we wouldn't put them in rows and separate them. We might put them together in pods, or we might use tables, right, where kids can sit more together to work on some of those social skills like group work and, you know, those types of things. So again, having to make sure that we do it safely. We still want to do like independence as much as possible, but also like working with that cooperation model a little bit as well. But helping the kids or engaging them in like some of the planning that goes on in regards to like maybe planning of what activities we might do next, or what centers might be coming up, because if we can engage them, we might, you know, take into account their interests, what they like to do for fun. If we can pick up on some of those, we might be able to include those in our centers too. So count and recount all children. I don't think we have big enough classes that we would maybe like lose them, but going on a field trip or going outside is very important to count and recount kids. It's probably everyone's nightmare that's involved in education, going on a field trip, leaving somebody somewhere. Definitely do not want to do that. But of course, this is similar to the setting up the classroom for behavior and the physical environment, but just modifying things as much as possible to meet goals, to remove, add, adjust is kind of a constant in the environment. So engaging families, a little bit more difficult, but can still be done, again, depending upon the setting that we're in, whether it's Head Start or preschool or K-3 classrooms. But principles of structuring to problems families bring up. So if they have, any issues, concerns, thoughts, things that, maybe their child is, talking about that might be happening in the classroom, we definitely want to talk about our thoughts and beliefs in terms of why we structure things the way we do in our classroom, how we set them up, the reason behind that. In terms of like individual work and group work as well. If you're going to have big changes in the classroom, and definitely communicate those to your families, right? Like maybe we would want to talk about when you change out centers, right? That taking away this center, we're adding this one, and maybe this is why, type thing. So. And then anytime they can come in the classroom, of course, is great to expose them to that, and then also help them to see what we are doing and some of the reasons behind that. So changing those centers and those activities too quickly, too often can be a little bit of a challenge, right? We want to make sure that students have time to engage in it, understand it, and for some of them, almost dive into detail in terms of what they're doing and maybe learning quite a bit. Supervision, of course, is important. And failing to go around, engage, and pay attention to what's happening, of course, is easy way to for us to kind of lose control of the classroom a little bit. But if something's not working, not sticking to it. It's okay to try to stick with something for a while. I mean, we might have to make minor changes if something is way off track, but we also don't want to give up too easily on something, whether it's a new center or a concept or a instructional technique or something that we're using. We might just need to tweak it a little bit, but don't give up on things too easily either. So inadequate directions or being very vague when we're trying to get kids to do certain things. So we want to provide them with feedback and also very specific instructions as much as possible. So okay, and then here's our pyramid of the all-knowing pyramid here, I guess. Of course, positive relationships, supportive environment, but managing the space is important. And so that's kind of that middle part here in regards to the physical space, social space, managing that, making sure it is set up correctly and adjusting and modifying it as much as possible. And then, of course, engaging, coaching, molding, helping those students kind of see what they can do if they're struggling with a little bit, providing some extra questions, some guiding questions to get them hopefully to move in that right direction and understand it a little bit more. Okay, questions about the environment? Okay. Yep.